What if I told you a 9-year-old black boy walked into a Philadelphia courtroom and made a judge stop breathing mid-sentence? He wasn't there to play cute. He was there to defend his mother because no one else would. When he said, "I'm my mom's lawyer," the whole system froze. By the time he was done, he'd exposed not just one father's lie, but the quiet racism that hides in America's justice halls. Stay with this story, because what this little boy revealed shook an entire courtroom and reminded the world that even the smallest voice can make power listen. And that's where it all began. One boy, one notebook, and a courtroom that didn't know it was about to make history. While the world outside kept spinning, inside those walls, the truth was lining up to be heard. No lawyers, no headlines, just a mother fighting to be seen and a child who refused to stay silent. Because sometimes the revolution doesn't start with a protest. It starts with a single sentence: "Your Honor, I am my mother's lawyer." The courtroom didn't feel like a place for justice that morning. It felt like a waiting room for judgment. The air was too clean, sterile, heavy with the scent of polished wood and quiet tension. You could hear the click of expensive shoes echo off marble floors, the rustle of papers that sounded like secrets being folded. 9-year-old Miles Carter stood beside his mother, Angela, who gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her hospital badge still hung from her pocket, the plastic catching the light like a piece of armor she'd forgotten to take off. Across the courtroom sat Preston Hale III, Miles's biological father, his gold cufflinks flashing each time he adjusted his tie. 2 lawyers flanked him, whispering strategies that smelled like money. Preston smirked once, or just enough for Miles to see it. Judge Whitaker, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, leaned forward on the bench. He'd seen too many cases like this one, a mother fighting for her child, a father showing up when the cameras might follow. But he hadn't seen this boy before. This small, serious kid in a collared shirt, 2 sizes too big, holding a spiral notebook like a sword. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Case number 14232, Carter versus Hale." Angela's stomach dropped. Preston's lawyers rose in perfect sync. For a moment, Miles looked so small beside them that Whitaker almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The judge began to speak, but before the first sentence could land, Miles's voice broke through the air, clear, confident, and completely out of place. "Your Honor," he said, level strong, "I am my mother's lawyer." The courtroom went silent. A clerk dropped her pen. Preston's younger attorney coughed, half hiding a smirk. Whitaker blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, young man," he said softly. "This is a legal hearing between adults." Miles didn't waver. "I know, Your Honor, but Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child says I have the right to speak in matters that directly affect me, and this case affects me more than anyone here." A murmur spread through the benches like a ripple of disbelief. Angela's breath caught. She wanted to stop him, to pull him back, but the way he stood, chin high, eyes steady, made her hesitate. Preston leaned forward, whispering harshly to his attorney. Who told him to say that? But Miles was already opening his notebook. The edges were bent, the pages filled with careful handwriting, half legal terms, half scribbles that looked like battle plans. "If the court wants to decide where I belong," he said softly, "then the court should at least hear me." Whitaker stared at him, pen frozen in his hand. He had presided over hundreds of custody cases, but never one where a child invoked international law. Angela whispered, "Miles, baby, please." He turned slightly toward her and shook his head, just once. It wasn't defiance. It was conviction. From the back row, a reporter leaned forward, sensing a headline. Somewhere, a camera clicked. Judge Whitaker sighed. "Go on, son. You have the court's attention." Miles straightened his papers like a lawyer who'd done this 100 times. His voice, though young, carried an odd steadiness. "This case isn't about custody," he said. "It's about money." Preston shifted in his chair, his lawyer, Dr. Dunn. Mitchell raised a hand. "Objection." But the judge silenced him with a glance. Miles continued, "My father wants custody because there's money attached to it. He hasn't called, visited, or written to me in almost 9 years. The only time I ever see him is when someone's taking a picture." Angela's eyes filled. The courtroom leaned in. "If this is about what's best for me," Miles said, "then maybe the court should ask me what that is." Whitaker felt something move in the room, an invisible shift, like the law itself had paused to listen. Preston forced a laugh, too loud, too brittle. "You've got to be kidding me. This is absurd." Miles met his father's gaze for the first time. "What's absurd," he said evenly, "is pretending you care now that your business is falling apart." The silence that followed didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like truth finally getting oxygen. Whitaker's pen tapped against the wood once, twice. "Mr. Hale, we'll hear the child out, for the record." Angela exhaled sharply, her hands trembling. She could barely recognize her son in that moment, his calmness, the quiet fire in his tone. Miles turned another page of his notebook. "Thank you, Your Honor." He didn't notice the reporters scribbling. He didn't see Preston's lawyers whispering in panic. All he saw was his mother's reflection in the polished table, tired, scared, but standing behind him. He knew that if he stopped now, they'd never listen again. So he lifted his chin and spoke the words that would change both their lives. "I have evidence." The gallery gasped again. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Evidence?" Miles nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Evidence that my father isn't here for me. He's here for my trust fund." The judge's pen stopped tapping. Preston's jaw locked. Angela whispered, "Miles." But he didn't stop. The words flowed now, steady and sure. "He thinks because I'm a kid, no one will believe me. But I've spent the last 3 months learning how to prove what adults try to hide." Outside, thunder rolled across the city, low and distant, as if the sky itself was listening. And inside that courtroom, sterile, silent, frozen in disbelief, a boy who barely reached the witness stand had just declared war on injustice. The judge didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the story left the walls of the courtroom and began rewriting how America listened to its children. The sound of the gavel stayed with Miles long after they left the courthouse, a clean wooden thud that felt like a door shutting or a heart trying to keep rhythm. The city outside hummed in winter colors, bus brakes sighing, a distant siren stitching the morning together, street vendors huddled in coats that knew too many Februaries. Angela tucked her scarf closer to her throat and squeezed Miles's shoulder as they waited for the Route 47. He was quiet, thoughtful, the way he got whenever he was turning a problem into a plan. At home, their apartment held the day's chill until the radiators woke up and rattled the walls like a polite ghost. Angela hung her coat and set her badge on the counter. The hospital smell, sanitizer, and burnt coffee clung to her scrubs like a second shift she couldn't clock out of. The mailbox on the hall table had spilled its nerves. Envelopes from Hale and Mitchell LLP. 2 final notices that weren't final if you called and begged. A flyer promising "We buy houses cash." "Don't worry about those," Angela said, too quickly, gathering the envelopes like she could smother them with her palms. "I'm not," Miles answered, and for once it sounded true. He washed his hands like the hospital posters taught him, thumbs, wrists, the space between each finger, and then he took his spiral notebook to the kitchen table. He opened to the page where he'd written in block letters, "Plan to win." Underneath, he added a line, "Stop being afraid of their paper." That night, the refrigerator hummed a lullaby for people who couldn't sleep. Angela dozed on the couch with the TV on low, a loop of weather and traffic, and that one car dealership guy who always yelled. Miles traced his day backwards. The moment the judge leaned forward, the way Preston smiled when he thought he'd already won, the clerk whose pen fell like a small accident. He pressed his fingers against the notebook rings until they left moon-shaped marks in his skin. He didn't feel brave, he felt busy, like he'd been assigned to build a bridge before the river flooded. Time chapter 100 payments. He met Ms. Alvarez on a Tuesday because good things in their life tended to happen on days with cheap bus fares. The free library doors breathed warm air into the cold city, and the guard nodded Miles through with the kind of recognition you earn by showing up and not causing trouble. The first time he'd wandered into the law section, he thought it would look like TV, thick books with shiny gold letters, words that knew how to obey. Instead, the shelves smelled like paper and patience. He was on his knees reading a pamphlet about court-appointed guardians when Ms. Alvarez's voice floated over his shoulder. Careful with that one. The state updated it last year and forgot to tell the pamphlet. She had dark curls twisted into a bun and a lanyard decorated with tiny library cards. Her eyes were the kind that said she remembered you, even if she didn't yet. "What brings you to family law for beginners?" she asked, gentle enough that a kid could tell the truth. "My mom," he said, "and a man who thinks money makes him my dad." She didn't flinch. "That's not in the index," she said, "but we can look." They made a study of it. On the second floor, there was a row of computers, no one loved but everyone needed. Ms. Alvarez taught him to ask better questions. "Don't search for what you feel," she said softly, guiding the mouse. "Search for what they write. Custody petition. Best interest standard. Philadelphia docket search. Save the feeling for when you talk." He learned the rhythm of public records. Click, scroll, click, wait. Court dockets held more truth than the evening news if you knew how to read them. Articles lived behind paywalls, but summaries didn't. Property records wore masks, LLCS, named after trees or rivers, but masks had seams. The library gave him a card, and the card gave him databases, and suddenly the city was less of a fog. It was lines and names and dates that connected like constellations if you had time and a pencil. On the third day, Ms. Alvarez brought him hot chocolate with the kind of whipped cream that made your nose cold. "You should know," she said, "I'm not a lawyer, but I am very nosy, and I believe in kids who ask good questions." He believed in her believing in him. They built a file the way you build a careful sandwich, layers in the right order so it didn't fall apart when you took a bite. Titles, timeline, parties, assets, lawsuits, trust. He wrote everything twice, once in legal words and once in words his mother could hear without her shoulders tensing. At home, Angela tried not to hover, which is difficult for a nurse and a mother. "You're reading more than me," she said, folding laundry into crisp rectangles. "You know that's illegal in some states." "It's only illegal if you read out loud," he said, and she laughed for the first time that week. They developed rituals. Before school, he made 2 lists, one for homework, one for evidence. After school, he checked the library computers like a fisherman checking traps. On Thursdays, he helped Ms. Alvarez reshelve returns, in exchange for which she let him print a few extra pages without the printer yelling about his quota. When Angela's bus schedule left her between shifts, she'd meet them at a table by the window. Ms. Alvarez would slide her a paper and say, "We found a thing." And Angela would nod and say, "Of course you did," like this was normal and gentle miracles were on the schedule now. Some nights the work felt like a secret language they were learning together. Other nights it felt like picking a lock on a house where someone you love is trapped. Angela kept a brave face until the apartment door closed, and then she let the fear out in quiet ways, wiping the counter too many times, counting diapers on the NICU supply list in her head, standing in the shower until the hot water apologized. Preston called once, late, the voice of a man who trusted phones to do his heavy lifting. Tell the boy I called, he said. Tell him. Tell him I miss him. Which birthday? Angela asked. What? Which one do you miss? Because the cake candles don't light if you don't show up with a match. He hung up. She stood in the kitchen staring at the microwave clock like it owed her back the hour he had taken. At school, Miles collected adults the way some kids collected trading cards. Mr. Daniels, the social studies teacher with a drawer full of granola bars, slid him an article about redlining. History loves to repeat itself, Mr. Daniels said. It hates to learn new songs. In the counselor's office, Ms. Benton, no relation to the overworked public defender, though the coincidence made Miles smile, asked if he felt safe at home. He nodded. She asked if he felt safe at court. He shook his head. The people in suits talk like I'm the weather, he said, like I'm happening but no one can do anything about it. She scribbled a note he didn't get to read. On Fridays, he stopped by Mr. Lewis's barbershop, where justice was a conversation and the line between sermon and joke blurred on purpose. The TV played sports until someone changed it to the news with a sigh. Men with careful fades and careful opinions weighed in on everything from politics to the price of eggs. When the story about Preston's company folded into the ticker, investigation into Hale Development Group. Mr. Lewis squinted at Miles in the mirror. That your daddy's name on there? I don't know him like that, Miles said softly. Mr. Lewis turned the clippers off. The room went quiet enough to hear hair falling. Then don't let his mess decide your name, he said. We don't got time to be ashamed of other people's foolishness. That weekend, the snow pretended it would stick and then didn't. Angela worked a double through a flu surge and came home with her scrubs wrinkled and her feet arguing with her. Miles reheated stew like a small scientist following a delicate protocol. They ate at the table with the good placemats, the ones Angela's sister had brought at Christmas, the ones that made you sit up a little straighter. Time thousands en. Mom, he said carefully, if someone offered you a house with a broken roof, would you take it? Depends on the neighborhood, she said, smiling tired. Depends who's selling. Depends if the roof is broken or just tired. He showed her a printout. Shell companies with tree names. Maple Street Holdings, Sycamore Equity, Riverbend Partners. Lines drawn in pencil connected addresses they knew to corporations they didn't. Look at the owners, he said. Look at the registered agents. Angela stared until the shape started to make an ugly kind of sense. He's buying up our block, she whispered. He's not buying it, Miles said, turning the page to a foreclosure schedule. He's waiting for it to fall. That night, the building had a meeting in the laundry room because the landlord liked to say community whenever he raised the rent. A flyer on the wall promised upgrades and opportunities and short-term inconvenience. The hall buzzed with a choir of languages, Spanish next to Creole, next to English with an accent that belonged to bus drivers and night shift custodians and women who cleaned other people's offices while their own kitchens went cold. Angela listened to neighbors talk about cash for keys offers, about sudden inspections, about notices taped to doors like warnings on a storm map. Who owns our building? A woman asked. Sycamore Equity, the super said. Who owns Sycamore Equity? A man asked. He shrugged. Money. Angela's phone buzzed at 2 a.m. NICU emergency. Could she come early? She pulled her coat on in the dark. At the door, she looked back at the small shape of her son sleeping, the notebook spread like a quilt across his chest. She wanted to be two people at once, the nurse who showed up for babies who couldn't breathe, and the mother who stayed to watch the breathing she'd fought to protect. She left him a note. Be stubborn. Be kind. Eat the yogurt. The bus was a moving chapel of exhausted travelers. A woman snored softly in a seat 2 rows up. Time 500 Ms. A teenager with a cracked phone pressed his eyes closed against a world that kept asking, Angela watched street lamps lift the city like a stage and told herself that surviving is not the same as losing. At the hospital doors, she breathed the familiar antiseptic promise. Here we make things clean, if not always better. Ms. Alvarez started teaching Miles tricks that weren't written down. How to request records without sounding like a child. How to ask a clerk for whatever is public and let the silence work. How to print an index and use the index to find the missing piece. They discovered a notice filed in a trust court, the name Eleanor Hale typed in a font that didn't expect company. The document didn't say everything, but it said enough to point. A conditional trust. A guardian ad litem appointment that never happened because no one told the child. A clause that smelled like it had been written by a grandmother who believed in caution but not in cowards. "Will they listen?" Miles asked. Ms. Alvarez tilted her head. "They'll hear. Listening is their problem, not yours." A security guard named Malik Dorsey, the same one who scanned library cards with a magician's flourish, leaned on the desk. "You building a case, little man?" "I'm building a bridge," Miles said. "Good," Malik replied. "Bridges get people home." The first time they printed the lawsuits against Hale Development, the printer jammed like it had an opinion about billionaires. Miles fed the pages in 2x2, gentle. He learned the difference between allegation and finding, between rumor and record. He learned that many adults worshiped the shape of a signature more than the truth it endorsed. He learned that racism wore suits and used synonyms. It didn't say black neighborhoods are targets. It said high-risk markets and underperforming assets and stabilization opportunities. He made a glossary in the back of his notebook. What? They say what they mean. On Sunday, Angela took him to church because sometimes you needed a choir behind you, even if you weren't sure what to sing. The pastor's sermon was about David and Goliath, which made Miles blush at the coincidence until he realized the story wasn't about him at all. It was about choosing your weapon. He looked down at his notebook and felt the pages weight his backpack like a promise. After the service, a woman with a baby on her hip pressed an envelope into Angela's hand. "For your boy," she said, "for the fighting he's doing for all our kids." Angela opened it later to find $20 and a note. "Keep his feet where the truth stands." On Monday, the courthouse lobby echoed like a school hallway on the last day of class. Too bright, too loud, the floor pretending it wasn't tired. Claire Benton, their overworked public defender, met them with coffee and apologies. "I'm buried," she said, eyes rimmed red. "I'm not proud of it, but I want you to know I believe in you." She looked at Miles. "If the judge lets you speak, I'll guard your time like it's oxygen." He nodded. "I brought air," he said, lifting the folder. In a corner of the lobby, a social worker with a clipboard, Jay Morales, watched them with a look that tried to measure without diminishing. Morales stepped over and knelt to Miles's eye level. "If you need a grown-up with access to a copier no one else knows about," they said, "I might know one." "Does it jam?" Miles asked. "Only when it's lying," Morales said, and Angela smiled despite herself. They walked past a framed poster that said, "Family First," in a font that might have meant it once. In the metal detector line, Preston appeared behind them like an echo of a decision someone regretted. He looked good in the way people look good when money has been teaching them how since birth. He didn't look at Miles. He looked at the folder like it had teeth. "You don't have to do this," Preston murmured to Angela. "We can settle. I can provide more." Angela kept her eyes on the tray where she'd placed her keys and phone. "Provide what you never gave," she said softly. "You can't buy retroactive birthdays." The guard waved them through. The elevator doors slid shut on Preston's smile. In the hallway outside courtroom 3F, a reporter with a microphone practiced his solemn face. A woman in a navy dress taped down flyaway hair and whispered, "If the kid speaks, lead with that. If not, lead with the wealth angle." Miles adjusted his glasses and pretended the cameras were trees. Ms. Alvarez wasn't allowed past security without a badge, but she came as far as she could. She put her hand on the glass and mouthed, "You got this." He didn't mouth anything back. He just nodded, once, like they were passing a baton. The hearing began precisely late in the way courtrooms like to prove they control time. Preston's lawyers performed concern like a well-rehearsed monologue. Stability, college prospects, the child's potential, structured environment. They stacked euphemisms like sandbags against a flood they sensed but couldn't name. Whenever Angela spoke, the judge's eyes flicked to the clock before returning to her. Whenever Dr. Mitchell spoke, the clock forgot it had hands. Miles's chest buzzed with a nervous electricity he pretended was courage. He thought about his glossary. He thought about Mr. Lewis's clippers buzzing to a stop. He thought about babies in incubators learning to breathe with machines that kept them honest. He thought about the bridge. When Claire touched his sleeve, it felt like the sound of a phone finally being answered. "Your Honor," she said, "the child requests to be heard." The courtroom murmured like a movie theater at a twist. Whitaker looked tired, then interested, then something else Miles couldn't name. He saw the judge's eyes soften, not with pity, but with a memory of why he'd taken this job before the paperwork tried to smother the reasons. "You may proceed," Whitaker said carefully. And that's how the moment began that would live on phones and feeds and the backs of eyelids. But before he opened his mouth, before he unclipped the recorder that would later make adults rearrange their careers, before the city learned the difference between attention and listening, the door at the rear of the courtroom clicked and a latecomer slipped into the last row. A woman with a small camera and a press badge that said, "Tara Nguyen." She lifted the lens the way a person lifts a prayer. Miles inhaled. He thought of his mother's note. Be stubborn. Be kind. Eat the yogurt. He decided to be stubborn and kind and hungry for the truth, all at once. He looked at Angela, and she looked at him, and for a second the room was only them, and a promise that had started long before this building decided it owned their story. "My name is Miles Carter," he said, "and if the court wants to know what's best for me, it should ask me what best is." He didn't know yet that the words would reach barbershops and classrooms and kitchen tables in cities he had never seen. He didn't know yet that people would argue about him like he was a symbol, then cry like he was a son. He didn't know yet that in the weeks ahead, strangers would send letters and money and prayers, and a few would send hate because hate hates to be reminded of its own grammar. He only knew the floor felt steady under his shoes, and the notebook felt solid in his hands, and the judge was looking at him like a person instead of a problem. "Go on," Whitaker said. So he did. Voice steady, facts arranged, compassion folded into the spaces where anger begged to stand. He started with the truth that fit in a sentence and walked toward the truth that needed a city to hold it. And as he spoke, the cameras captured something rarer than a headline. A child teaching a room how to listen without interrupting. The gavel had begun a song earlier that day. Now the notes found their chorus. Miles laid out the first thread of a tapestry he'd been weaving in quiet, one that started in a library where proof smelled like toner and faith and led here to a bench that had forgotten how to lean forward until a boy reminded it. Outside, snow surrendered to rain. Inside, the room shifted its weight from doubt to witness. And the story, without warning, without permission, crossed the exact point where the past becomes evidence and the future starts taking notes. By the second week, the courthouse hall started to recognize Miles the way a neighborhood recognizes the kid who always runs errands for his mama. Respectful nods from the security guard, a half smile from the clerk who'd once told him to take his hat off, a camera that always seemed to find him even when he tried to be the background. Attention didn't make him taller, it just made the floor feel shorter, like he had less room to trip. Inside courtroom 3F, bias didn't kick down the door. It walked in wearing cologne and precedent. Dr. Mitchell, polished like a commercial for success, stood with one hand tucked into his jacket pocket and said the word stability so often it stopped meaning anything. Your Honor, a child with Miles' potential requires educational stability, structured routines, richer academic environments. Absent that, we risk squandering his gifts. He glanced at Angela as if the word absent were a mirror he was holding up to her life. Ms. Carter, the judge said, how many hours do you work in a week? Angela lifted her chin. 50 to 60, Your Honor, depending on the surge. I work nights in the ER. I'm a charge nurse some shifts. And who watches Miles? My sister on nights I can't be there, otherwise me. Dr. Mitchell slid his pen along a yellow legal pad like he was underlining a foregone conclusion. So, to be clear, the child lives in a high-crime zip code with a mother who is frequently absent due to employment and who lacks the financial means for enrichment opportunities. Objection to the characterization, Claire said, voice strained but present. Miss Carter isn't absent. She's working to keep her son housed. A mother's presence can't be clocked in like a shift, Dr. Mitchell answered smoothly. We're talking about what's best for the child. That was the game. Turn love into a scheduling conflict and poverty into negligence. Miles wrote in his notebook, they weaponized the calendar. The gallery leaned forward and backward together like a human tide. A woman in the second row shook her head, whispering, same story, to a man who kept his eyes on the floor. Preston sat taller, confident in the kind of quiet that men practice when they know the room likes their voice. On cross, Dr. Mitchell asked Angela about her neighborhood as if it were a disease. Is it true there were 2 shootings within 5 blocks last month? Yes, Angela answered evenly. And also true that I've treated gunshot victims who came from neighborhoods with Whole Foods and security gates. Violence doesn't carry a map. Do you own a car? No. How does the boy get to school? Bus, feet. Sometimes I walk him when the weather is mean. And 2 extracurriculars? What extracurriculars? Angela asked before she could stop herself. We have homework and dinners, and I teach him to fold fitted sheets. Does that count? Laughter rippled until the gavel smoothed it out. Dr. Mitchell smiled like he'd expected the answer. He didn't say poor. He didn't have to. He just let the room picture it. Buses in winter, noodles on sale, a mother who smelled like bleach and miracles. When Miles left the stand, he noticed the judge's eyes tracking him with a complicated patience. Whitaker wasn't the villain in our story. He was the water, shaping to its vessel, slow to remember it could carve rock. After lunch, Preston testified like a man who'd been coached his whole life and found the coaching comfortable. I only want what's best for my son, he said, letting son linger like an apology. I can provide opportunities, tutors, summer programs, a stable environment, my home is quiet, my schedule. He paused to look soft. I can make time. You've had 9 years to make time, Claire said. I wasn't informed of his potential. Miles's pen scratched. They only see you when you're useful. That evening, the hallway outside the courtroom turned into a press mix. A reporter with perfect hair asked Angela, do you feel your race is being used against you? Angela looked at the camera with a tired honesty she hadn't had the bandwidth to rehearse. I feel like my child is being used. Race just makes it easier. The clip went small screen viral, the nurse in scrubs speaking plain truth while men in suits walked past like they had headphones on. In barbershops across Philadelphia, the TV volume went up. In classrooms, a few teachers pressed play and then turned it off because the room was not ready for that conversation on a Wednesday. At Mr. Lewis's shop, a teenager said if it was a white mom, they'd call her hard-working. An older man shook his head. They'd say she's doing her best. Mr. Lewis set the clippers down and pointed at the screen where Angela, now a loop, looked into a lens like it was someone's eye. "We always been doing our best," he said. "They just like to grade us harder." Preston's PR machine spun up fast. An op-ed appeared in a conservative-leaning paper, Father Fights for Son's Future. It called him a philanthropist and job creator. It called Angela's neighborhood a risky environment. It never called Miles black, but every other sentence did. On the bus, Miles read the piece twice. He underlined the sentence about lifting children out of cycles of disadvantage and wrote in the margin, "not a forklift." The next hearing, the courtroom felt different, like someone had cracked a window and the weather was deciding whether to come in. Jay Morales, the social worker, filed an interim report that was less about feelings and more about facts. The child is bonded with his mother. He is safe. He is thriving academically. He shows unusual initiative and self-advocacy. Morales looked up from the paper. He also brought me a 2-page list of resources for other kids in his situation. I have entered it as Exhibit N. Dr. Mitchell objected on style. "We're not here to laud the child's extracurricular legal curiosity." "Maybe we should be," Morales said under their breath, not quite into the mic, not quite off record. Outside, a landlord's agent taped a notice to Angela's building. Annual inspection, 48 hours. The super shrugged when she asked why the notices always came when cameras did. "I don't make the rules," he said. "I just move the goalposts." That night, a man in a crisp polo slid a cash for keys envelope under Angela's door. She slid it back and taped a handwritten note over the peephole. "Wrong apartment, right woman." Meanwhile, Ms. Alvarez taught Miles the art of the FOIA request. "It's like ordering off menu," she said. "You won't always get what you want, but you'll find out what the kitchen's hiding." They filed requests for city emails between Hale's companies and certain bank officers. They requested inspection logs. They requested meeting minutes from the Housing Authority and Development Committee agendas with innocuous titles like Neighborhood Revitalization that translated to "We liked your block better without you." The first trickle of documents gave them little and everything. Black bars hid names, but the timestamps remained. A meeting here, a call there, a note. Level moderate. Follow-up re. Carter Property Cluster. Miles circled cluster like it was a wound. At school, kids had started to whisper. Some were kind in the way that stung. "You're brave." As if bravery were a choice he'd made instead of a corner he'd been pushed into. Some were not kind at all. In gym, a boy named Aaron lifted his chin and said, "So, your dad's a billionaire, huh? Must be nice to pick favorites." Miles said nothing because he was learning which fights fed the story and which starved it. Mr. Daniels kept granola bars and the day's news. He slid a printout across the desk. "Word is, Hale Development got federal attention." "Attention isn't the same as trouble," Miles said. "No," Mr. Daniels agreed, "but it's gasoline if you can find the match." The match came from a place Miles didn't expect. An anonymous email dropped into the account Ms. Alvarez had created for document requests and legitimate curiosity only. Check the Riverside contract. The academy isn't what he says it is. The sender signed with a single letter. K. Miles and Ms. Alvarez traced the tip to a public procurement site and then to a private school accreditation database that didn't like visitors but tolerated persistence. Redstone Military Academy's disciplinary record wasn't a record so much as a rumor with paperwork. Staff turnover that looked like musical chairs played by ghosts. Incident reports with adjectives where nouns should be. A mom blog buried in the internet said, "My son learned to make his bed and to disappear." The academy's brochure showed mountains and smiling kids in uniforms that wanted to be trusted. The brochure didn't show the complaint filed by a boy whose wrists had learned the shape of zip ties. "Can we prove it?" Miles asked. "We can prove there's smoke," Ms. Alvarez said. "Sometimes that's enough to make the room look again." On a gray Wednesday, the courthouse blessed them with a recess long enough to be dangerous. Tara Nguyen, the podcaster with the camera that didn't scream, "Look at me," asked Angela for a quiet interview where the fluorescent lights couldn't bully the conversation. "I'm not trying to make you a symbol," Tara said. "I'm trying to let you be a person in a story that always turns people into positions." Angela agreed, surprising herself. In the interview, she didn't cry, she didn't sharpen, she spoke in the simple grammar of living. "I told my son that sometimes the scariest thing is the most necessary. He took it too literally." Tara asked Miles one question. "When did you decide to speak?" He looked at the notebook in his lap. "The day I realized the grown-ups were going to decide my life without asking me what it felt like to live it." The episode, posted that night, traveled like whispers travel in apartment buildings, under doors, up stairwells, through vents. Comments stacked. "This feels like my cousin's case. I wish I had a library like that when I was a kid. Who do I email to get those legal corners started where I live?" Among the praise came the ugliness the internet keeps in its pocket. Keep kids out of politics. Where's the father's side? Single mothers ruin the country. Tara's producer deleted what she could. The rest stood there like a wall they couldn't move, only climb over. Preston's team tried another angle. They filed a motion to appoint a guardian ad litem who happened to be golfing buddies with a Hale board member. Claire objected, citing conflict. Morales testified, flat voice, full integrity. The judge sustained. Preston didn't look at Morales on the way out. Morales looked at Preston like a measurement. On a bus ride home, an older woman reached across the aisle and put a peppermint in Miles's palm. "For your nerves," she said. "I used to take these to job interviews. Suck on it slow. Makes it feel like time is on your side." He did. It didn't fix anything. It gave his mouth something sweet to argue with. The next day, Ms. Alvarez slid across a stack of printouts and a grin. "We found the map," she said. It was a timeline of foreclosures and acquisitions. Sycamore Equity, Riverbend Partners, Maple Street Holdings, each LLC like a polite mask on a face that kept staring back as Hale. The addresses were a line of dominoes pushed by meetings with banks that called families delinquent like it was their names. "How do we make them see it?" Miles asked. "We show the pattern until even people who like patterns get uncomfortable," Ms. Alvarez said. They built exhibit boards old school style with glue sticks and determination because sometimes the future needs to see the past taped down. The lines connecting shell companies to off-the-record meetings and to a trust that bent the word welfare until it meant access made a picture that was more argument than art. Malik the guard stopped by on break, eyes narrowing. "That there?" he said, pointing at the line between a foreclosure date and a donation to a councilman's pet project. "That's how they hide in the open." In the next hearing, Dr. Mitchell tried to launder his prejudice through numbers. "Test scores show promise," he said, presenting charts that made a boy into a slope. "Children like Miles benefit from rigorous discipline." He glanced at Angela. "More structure than a single working mother can reasonably provide." Angela spoke without flinching. "Time 300 malams. I have structure you don't see. Dinner, homework, drills on please and thank you, and tell the truth even when your throat is shaking. I taught him the bus route and the hours at the library and how to call 911 and stay calm. If you don't think that's structure, it's because you don't know our kind." The judge didn't smile. He didn't need to. The room had heard it. Miles knew they were winning people in inches, not yards, and inches can save a game if you know where the line is. But the line kept moving. A letter came from the school district. Due to recent media attention, we recommend a temporary change in the child's schedule for his safety. It sounded like care. It felt like exile. Angela met with the principal, a woman who spoke in phrases like optics and best practice. Angela said, "Best practice is teaching bullies to be bored by cruelty." The principal blinked and offered counseling. "Do you ever get tired?" Tara asked after a long day of testimony. Angela smiled without humor. "Fatigue is my resting heart rate." Late that night, as the city settled into the sound of its own breath, a reply leaked into the email account they were starting to check too often. From K again, follow the bank. Internal audit flagged someone. Look for initials P.H. Ms. Alvarez's fingers hovered over the keyboard like a pianist deciding whether to start the coda. "Could be nothing," she said. "Could be everything." They found everything in the way you always do, piece by stubborn piece. A bank officer's calendar requested meetings tied to risk review. Cross-reference with a campaign donation list and a charity gala photo, and there was Preston, shaking hands with people who liked handshakes more than neighbors. The pattern sharpened into motive. The motive spilled into method. Miles practiced how to say it without sounding like a kid who thought he'd discovered fire. He practiced in the mirror while brushing his teeth. He practiced at the bus stop, mouthing words into scarf fibers. He practiced under his breath while Angela counted out cash at the corner store while the cashier asked, "Y'all doing okay?" The way community asks, not the way systems ask. A week later, the courthouse hall smelled like wet coats and the things people couldn't say out loud. Morales passed by and tapped the folder in Miles's arms. "Be clear," they said. "Don't try to be impressive. You already are." In court, Dr. Mitchell opened with kindness sharpened to a weapon. "We don't question Ms. Carter's intentions. We question her resources." He lifted a glossy brochure for Redstone Military Academy. Mountains. Smiles. This environment will challenge Miles. It will give him peers. It will connect him with alumni networks that open doors his current circumstances never will. Miles felt something cold climb his spine. He thought of the mom blog and the complaint and the staff turnover that turned into silence. He thought of kids like him. Keep him out of the picture. He thought of the recorder in his backpack and the way a voice becomes a fist if you hold it up to the light. He looked at Angela and she nodded once, a green light in the rear view. Claire stood. "Your Honor, before we consider brochures, I'd like to introduce Exhibits M through R." The boards came out like shields. Timelines, corporate trees, emails that didn't say guilt, but didn't say innocence either. The judge's eyes sharpened as if the font had improved. Dr. Mitchell tried to object to the glue, to the arrows, to the fact that truth looked too much like a trap. Preston shifted, cufflinks catching the fluorescent sun. "Time 300 malams." For the first time, his confidence frayed at the edges. In the second row, the man who always kept his eyes on the floor looked up. In the back, Tara turned her camera just enough to catch a human face, learning it might not be the main character anymore. The judge requested a brief recess to review. The room exhaled like a choir that had given its last note to the ceiling. In the hallway, the vending machine ate Angela's dollar and refused to apologize. She laughed, startled by it, and for a moment the hallway felt like a place where ordinary things could still happen. "Do we have enough?" Miles asked, voice small around the edges. "We have the truth," Angela said. "That's not the same as enough." "No," she agreed softly, "but it's the part you can carry without it breaking you." When they went back in, Whitaker's posture had changed by degrees only people in trouble can see. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He wasn't pretending the floor wasn't slanted. "Proceed," he said, and his voice had the weight of someone who'd put his hand on something hot and decided to hold it anyway. Dr. Mitchell returned to the brochure like a man clinging to a floaty in deep water. He said structure again and discipline again and outcomes again, and each time he did, the words sounded more tired. Claire asked him one question. Who profits from the trust funds when tuition is paid? He hesitated the length of a breath. The institution, of course. And who chooses the institution? He didn't answer, which answered enough. Whitaker tapped his pen once, twice. We will hear from the child, he said, not as indulgence, but as requirement. He turned to Miles. Keep it brief and clear. Miles stood. His knees felt like they'd been borrowed from a taller kid, and he was still learning how to drive them. He didn't look at the cameras or the man who'd given him his last name and his first lesson in absence. Time 300 malams. He looked at the judge and the floor and the boards they'd built with glue and hope. I understand the court wants what's best for me, he said. I also understand the words what's best have been misused a lot in rooms like this. So I brought different words. I brought why. He told them about the companies massed as trees and rivers. He told them about meetings that lined up like dominoes and the trust that bent toward convenience when a signature asked it to. He told them about Redstone, not the mountains or the smiles, but the turnover and the complaint, and the way kids who are too loud with their minds get labeled trouble by adults who prefer furniture. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room rose to meet it. Children like me, he said, and for once those words were his to define, don't need to be rescued from our mothers. We need to be rescued from the idea that money makes better parents, and that black neighborhoods only teach black problems. Angela wiped her cheeks with her wrist. Dr. Mitchell stared at his pad as if a new argument might appear if he blinked slow enough. Preston sat very still, a man trying not to rattle. The gavel stayed sleeping because the judge wanted the moment to finish itself. We are not poor in the ways that matter, Miles said. We are rich in the things you can't buy. Time that's hard-earned, neighbors who show up, a library that points you toward the truth. He exhaled. If you want to know what's best for me, ask me where I feel loved, then make the law generous enough to match it. He sat. The room did the kind of quiet that makes prayers feel redundant. Whitaker cleared his throat, and the spell moved but didn't break. Court will reconvene tomorrow, he said. We'll review these exhibits in detail. Counsel, be prepared to address the trust and the academy. He didn't say, I see it. He arranged his face into the usual solemnity judges wear to protect the fragile idea that justice is not a performance. But when he stood, his hands gripped the bench a little tighter than before. People who weren't watching missed it. People who were held their breath. Outside, the sky tried to snow again and failed forward into rain. Reporters crowded, microphones turned to weapons and confessionals. Angela shielded Miles with her body, not because she thought the questions would bruise him, but because she knew the answers might be stolen. Tara hung back, camera low, heart high. In the doorway, Morales nodded once, like a promise. Ms. Alvarez texted a single emoji, 2 hands raised, because sometimes icons do their best. On the bus home, a baby cried and then stopped because a stranger made a face. A man offered his seat. A woman refused change for a coffee she didn't need from a boy who needed to feel generous. Miles leaned his head on Angela's shoulder, notebook closed on his lap like a sleeping animal. She kissed his hairline and tasted rain and paper and the metal of the day. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, she said. He didn't ask if tomorrow would be kinder. He knew better than to make big requests of the calendar. He asked for smaller mercies, a printer that wouldn't jam, a judge who would keep leaning forward, a country that might stop confusing the price of a thing with its value. The city slid past in smudged lights. Inside the rattling bus, the kind of silence that holds people together pressed them shoulder to shoulder. Miles sucked the last of the peppermint, sweet gone sour, the stubborn tiny shard that refuses to melt. He kept it on his tongue anyway, because sometimes the smallest piece is the thing that gets you through to morning. The morning arrived like it was trying not to be noticed. Low sky, gray light, a kind of hush that makes even buses whisper. Angela tied her hair back in the hallway mirror and tucked loose strands behind her ears the way she did before a hard shift. Miles buttoned his shirt wrong the first time and fixed it without a word. They didn't say, "Today is the day." They said the smaller things: keys, phone, notebook. Because big words can spook a moment before it gets to prove itself. In the courthouse lobby, Officer Malik Dorsey greeted them with a chin lift and the quiet respect you give people who are doing brave things they didn't ask to do. "You good?" he asked. "We're ready," Angela said, which wasn't exactly what he asked and exactly what he needed to hear. Tara waited near the security line, camera low. "No ambush today," she murmured. "You set the pace." Miles nodded. He was learning which lenses were hunting and which were listening. The hallway to courtroom 3F was crowded. Lawyers in expensive shoes, parents with manila folders, kids with backpacks and tired eyes. Claire Benton slipped them 2 coffees and a paper cup of water with the careful choreography of a waitress in a storm. "I've got you," she said, more promise than plan. Morales stood nearby, clipboard tucked under one arm like a shield. "We'll keep the room honest," they said. When they entered, the air felt different, charged, like a room that knew a secret and was curious whether it was about to be forgiven. Dr. Mitchell arranged his papers the way a magician arranges props before pretending the rabbit wasn't in the hat the whole time. Preston sat with his jaw locked and his cufflinks throwing tiny suns onto the table. Judge Whitaker took the bench, gaze even, gavel resting like a sleeping animal he preferred not to wake. "Counsel," he began, "I've reviewed the filings and the exhibits introduced yesterday. Today we'll focus on the trust instrument and the educational plan proposed by the petitioner." Dr. Mitchell stood, shoulders relaxed. "Your Honor, the trust established by Eleanor Hale was designed to ensure the child's welfare. My client's plan, enrollment at Redstone Military Academy, meets the definition of educational welfare. It provides structure, discipline, and access to networks that will benefit the child beyond anything his current circumstances can offer." "Where exactly is Redstone?" Whitaker asked. "Arizona," Mitchell said smoothly, "a nationally respected boarding institution." Angela's fingers tightened around the paper cup until it dented. Miles felt the shift in her breath. A tiny tremor she'd trained herself to swallow when the ER alarms went off. He slid his hand over hers beneath the table. 2 taps. "I'm here." She answered with one. "I know." "Ms. Carter," the judge said, "do you wish to respond now or through counsel?" Angela glanced at Claire. Claire nodded. "Your Honor," Angela said, voice steady, "we believe the plan is not about my son's welfare, but about accessing his funds while removing him from his community and his mother. We ask the court to consider evidence of motive." "Objection to speculation." Mitchell rolled his pen between his fingers. "Overruled," Whitaker said mildly, without breaking eye contact with Angela. "Proceed." Claire rose. "We will recall the child briefly for foundation, then submit documentary evidence." She turned to Miles. "Keep it clear, keep it short." He stood, knees remembering how to be steady. The courtroom watched him the way people watch a tightrope, some hoping for a miracle, a few waiting for a fall, most unable to look away. He adjusted his glasses, not performance, ritual. "Mr. Carter," Claire said, "can you tell the court where you obtained the information you provided about your father's business and the trust?" "Public records," he said. "Court dockets, real estate filings, state databases, newspaper archives. Ms. Alvarez showed me how." "And about Redstone?" "Accreditation databases, complaints, staff turnover reports, a blog by a parent whose kid attended, nothing private, just the parts of the truth that were left lying around." A smile tugged at the corner of Whitaker's mouth before discipline pulled it back. And the recorder you referenced yesterday? Miles slid the small device from his backpack and placed it on the evidence tray like a delicate instrument. This records audio, Your Honor. 6 months ago, Mr. Hale visited our apartment. He took a call in the living room. I left the recorder on the shelf. Mitchell moved to his feet. Your Honor, we object to the admission, absence of two-party consent. Claire was ready. Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state for interception of communications, but the child was a party to the conversation in the apartment, and the recording captured statements made in a common area where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Additionally, it's admissible for impeachment. Even if admitted, we contest relevance, Mitchell said. The court will hear it, Whitaker replied, tone flat as a ruled line. Counsel may argue wait after. The bailiff received the device like it might bite. The clerk connected it to the court speakers with a cable that looked too ordinary for what it was about to carry. Angela folded her hands and pressed her thumbs together until they found prayer by accident. The room exhaled. The click of a button. And then a voice. Preston's. Filled the dry air, warmer than a photograph and colder than a ledger. Soon as I get custody, the boy goes straight to Redstone. Strict boarding, no nonsense. Keeps him occupied. Tuition comes from the trust. It's called educational expenses. Clean. She's out. I have access. Everybody wins. A second voice, muffled. And the kid? Preston's laugh was a small cruelty dressed as charm. The kid will be fine. He'll have structure, and he doesn't need to know about the money. It's better that way. The room didn't gasp this time. It tightened, a collective muscle spasm. Mitchell stayed seated and very still, the way people do when a fire alarm finally proves it wasn't a drill. Whitaker's eyes drifted to Preston. Just briefly, just enough. Continue, Claire said. Preston again, lower now, impatient. Look, the problem with boys like him, they get ideas, ask questions, think they're owed explanations. Redstone takes care of that. 18 comes fast when you're busy. Meanwhile, the funds are managed. I look like Father of the Year. She can cry on Facebook with the rest. The clerk stopped the audio as if mercy were a button. For a heartbeat, the courtroom had no air. Miles stood very straight. He wasn't smiling. He looked like someone who had walked into a burning room to carry out a sleeping truth. Mitchell rose slowly, choosing his words like he was walking barefoot through glass. Your Honor, context matters. My client was under tremendous stress. He was describing one option among many. Does Mr. Hale deny the authenticity of the recording? Whitaker asked. No, Your Honor, Mitchell swallowed. He denies the insinuation of malice. Noted, Whitaker said, voice softening into a steel that didn't need to shout. Claire moved. Your Honor, we submit further exhibits regarding Redstone. She displayed a chart, staff turnover by quarter, incident reports euphemized into oblivion, a withdrawn accreditation warning. We also submit a parent complaint, names redacted, alleging physical discipline and prolonged isolation. We're not asking the court to adjudicate those claims today. We're asking the court to weigh the prudence of sending a 9-year-old there under the pretext of educational welfare. Redstone remains accredited. Families choose it. Boys thrive there. Mitchell tried to pivot, but his argument had lost its bones. Boys who stop asking questions, Miles said before he could stop himself. Whitaker didn't rebuke him. Some silences are approvals in dress clothes. Now, the trust. Claire presented a certified copy of the key pages. Eleanor Hale created the trust to protect the child's welfare. Disbursement for education requires that the custodian, Mr. Hale, if awarded custody, submit invoices for tuition and related costs. The custodian is granted managerial access to the funds for that limited purpose. Mitchell nodded as if this proved his point. Claire tapped the clause. Yet, interestingly, the trust also provides a second path, full disbursement to the child at 18 if custody is not sought or awarded. The grandmother anticipated two possibilities, a father who would be a father and a father who would not. What we have here, by Mr. Hale's own recorded admission, is an attempt to claim the reward reserved for the father he never chose to be. The grandmother's intent is speculation, Mitchell said. Intent is often inferred by behavior and language, Claire answered. We have language. We have behavior. Whitaker leaned back, thinking the way judges do when the robe feels heavier because it finally fits. Mr. Hale, he said quietly, did you ever seek to be appointed as guardian ad litem for the trust when the child was younger? Preston stared. Why would I? Exactly, Whitaker murmured. Under the table, Angela reached for Miles's hand and squeezed twice. He squeezed back, and in that small exchange was a universe. NICU nights, rent due Fridays, bus stop Tuesdays, library Thursdays, every shift she had ever worked, every question he had ever asked. Mitchell regrouped. Even accepting the most uncharitable reading, he said, the fact remains, my client can provide a materially superior environment. The mother's zip code is dangerous. She lacks the time and resources required to nurture a gifted child. Redstone is not an orphanage, Whitaker said softly, nor is the child an inconvenience to be warehoused until 18. Claire wasn't done. We also submit email headers and meeting logs showing meetings between Hale Urban Holdings and bank officers regarding properties adjacent to Ms. Carter's building. The cluster is labeled Carter Corridor in an internal memo. Objection, Mitchell found breath. Relevance. Pattern, motive, Claire said. When Mr. Hale says she's out of the picture, he's not only describing custody, he's describing a path to control an entire corridor. The child is both a means and a marketing line. Whitaker rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. We will take a 15-minute recess, he said. Court security will retain the recorder for chain of custody. Counsel remain available. The gavel fell, a quiet punctuation that sounded nothing like an ending. In the hallway, sound returned like weather. Reporters adjusted microphones. Cameras stretched their necks. Tara didn't approach. She filmed the door, the hands, the way Miles leaned into Angela's shoulder for a breath, and then stood straight again, remembering the camera wasn't the point. Ms. Alvarez appeared at the end of the corridor, palms pressed to the glass like a blessing. Malik stood by the door, eyes scanning, posture of a man who volunteered for the front line without paperwork. Hey, Morales said softly to Miles, how's your stomach? Feels like I swallowed a cell phone that won't stop vibrating, he said, surprising them both into a small laugh. Angela sipped water she couldn't taste. You okay? He nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. An honest answer. It's weird. I thought I'd feel happy to play it. I just feel tired. Truth is heavy, Morales said. It's why we carry it together. 15 minutes measured themselves out in stares and whispered strategy and a vending machine that coughed out a candy bar like it wanted to apologize for earlier. When they filed back in, the room felt narrower, as if the walls had leaned in to hear better. Whitaker returned, face unreadable in the righteous way. We'll proceed, he said. The recordings will be admitted for the limited purposes of impeaching credibility and establishing intent. The trust language is before the court. The Redstone materials, though not adjudicated here, raise significant concern. Mitchell tried once more, reaching for a rope that was fraying in his hand. Your Honor, the court's role is to rise above emotion. The child is articulate, yes, but he is a child. We cannot allow a 9-year-old to drive complex legal determinations. Whitaker's eyes went to Miles. "The law is not driven by the child," he said. "It is informed by him. There is a difference. We forget it too often." He turned pages slowly, a ritual. "I'm ordering a temporary protective order on the trust to prevent disbursements pending further review. I am suspending any plan to enroll the child at Redstone. I will hear closing submissions on custody after limited additional inquiry into Mr. Hale's financial representations." Preston's jaw ticked. Under the table, his fist closed and opened like a bad idea rehearsing. He leaned toward Mitchell. "Fix it," he hissed. The judge heard without hearing. "One more thing," Whitaker said, looking at Preston directly for the first time. "The court takes particular note of your recorded statement. She's out of the picture. The mother is not out of any picture in which this child thrives. You will contain your impulses to rearrange his life to suit your balance sheet." The gavel rested where it was. The words did the striking. Closing time arrived without fanfare. Claire kept hers simple. Love plus proof. Mitchell kept his abstract, potential plus resources. When it was over, Whitaker stacked the papers, aligned them as if he could make order by insisting on straight edges, and said the words that let people breathe or break. "Custody determination deferred. Orders entered as stated. Court is adjourned until Friday." Outside, the sky remembered how to be blue between clouds. People spilled into the hallway as if the building had pushed them. Tara caught up to Angela. "I won't ask how you feel," she said. "I know the answer is like a person who carried a building uphill. But may I ask what you'll do next?" "Work my shift," Angela said. She looked at Miles. "And make spaghetti." Tara smiled, a real one. "America runs on spaghetti." They stepped into the cold, and the city gave them an ordinary gift, a green light that stayed green long enough to cross without hurrying, a driver who waved them on, a corner store that had their favorite brand of sauce on sale. They laughed at nothing and everything, that tired laughter that comes when a weight has shifted but not yet lifted. In the apartment, Miles set the recorder on the table like a trophy he didn't want. Angela boiled water and added salt the way her mother taught her, like the ocean should be, not like a doctor says it is. And the steam fogged the window until the city outside blurred into a painting. They ate in the good chairs. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Later, while Angela rinsed plates, Miles opened the notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a clean page. "We told the truth out loud." Then he added another, "Now make them say it back." On the TV, a debate flickered, two commentators arguing about whether a kid should be allowed to speak in court. One said, "It sets a dangerous precedent." The other said, "So does ignoring the person most affected." The closed captions lagged behind, words chasing voices like a story chasing its meaning. Tara's episode went up at midnight. The first comment read, "My nephew sat in family court and never got asked a single question." The second, "Kids aren't props, they're eyewitnesses." The third, "This is racism in America, when money says best and means mine." The fourth, "Unseen black stories, seen today. Keep going, kid." Miles didn't read the comments. He was asleep, finally. The recorder tucked into a drawer and the apartment humming the soft music of plumbing and neighbors and a city that had learned a little more about itself. Angela watched him from the doorway, the way mothers have watched children since time learned to count, and whispered a promise to a quiet room. "I will keep the picture honest." Down the hall, a notice had been taped to the elevator. Inspection postponed. No explanation. In the morning, the landlord would claim scheduling conflicts. In truth, sometimes light is a disinfectant, and sometimes it's a security system. Either way, it changes who tries the door. In another part of the city, Preston stared at his ceiling in a room that cost too much for the way it made him feel small. He replayed his own voice and discovered how cruel it sounded when it traveled without excuses. He told himself the kid had trapped him. He told himself the kid was a genius. He told himself 1,000 things that weren't the one thing he didn't know how to say, I was wrong. Friday waited with its own weather. The law would speak again. But tonight belonged to the people who had spoken first. The mother who refused to be erased. The child who refused to be managed. The librarian who believed that truth should be shelved within reach. The guard who kept doors open long enough for dignity to walk through. The social worker who underlined the right word. The journalist who didn't push. The teacher with granola bars. The barber with opinions and a good mirror. A little nation of care bigger than any trust. The city slept like it meant it for once. And the story, now fully awake, moved forward without announcing where one chapter ended and the next began, just the way a river does when it decides to stop asking stone for permission. Friday didn't roar. It arrived with the soft authority of an early train and the promise that schedules meant something again. The city shook off the night like a coat. Street sweepers performed their small mercy on the curbs, and the bakery on the corner fogged its windows with cinnamon and heat. Angela woke before her alarm and lay there for a beat, listening to the house exhale, counting Miles's breaths the way she used to when he was a baby. He was bigger now, but some parts of mothering refused to retire. They ate toast too fast, laughed at nothing, and did the mirror dance, her straightening his collar, him swatting her hands, both pretending it was about fabric when it was really about courage. On the bus, a toddler waved at Miles until he waved back. An older man read the paper with the slow care of someone who still trusted ink more than glass. The headline was not about them. The third paragraph was, Court halts boarding plan in custody case with trust fund twist. In the photo, the judge's bench looked like a cliff, and Miles looked like a small climber who wasn't afraid of heights, just of falling and landing where he'd started. Courtroom 3F held a different temperature, subtle, like the thermostat had found its spine. Reporters were present, but less hungry. The clerk seemed less brittle. Malik at the door said, "Let's finish what we started." And the way he said, we felt like a rope pulled taut between strangers who had agreed to be a team without a meeting. Whitaker took the bench with papers arranged in an order that suggested sleep had been a courtesy, not a habit. "Good morning," he said, and it sounded like a verdict had already decided what kind of day it wanted to be. He nodded to Claire. "Counsel for respondent?" "Ready, Your Honor," Claire said, actual fuel in her voice now, not just fumes. Morales sat behind them with the calm of someone who'd seen hearings rearrange families and knew how to rescue dignity from rubble. Mitchell stood, immaculate as always, but the suit wore him today, not the other way around. Time 400 mems. Your Honor, we renew our position. Material advantage and structured education in a stable environment are controlling factors. Any alleged statements on that recording were taken during a period of extreme stress. Mr. Hale, Whitaker said, pivoting away from the rhetorical hallway, I have a few direct questions. Yes, Your Honor. Preston cleared his throat. Have you, in the last 9 years, provided child support voluntarily beyond court-ordered amounts? No. Have you attended parent-teacher conferences, medical appointments, or school events? No. Have you ever, prior to filing this petition, sought legal avenues to increase your involvement in your son's life? No. Whitaker let the answers stack like bricks, making a wall no one would claim to have built. Finally, do you deny that access to the trust's educational disbursements played a role in your renewed interest in custody? Mitchell started to rise. Your Honor, I asked the petitioner. Preston angled his shoulders, searching for the version of truth that would cost the least. It was part of the plan, he said at last. It would allow me to provide opportunities efficiently. There was no gavel strike, but you could hear the sound of something inside the room cracking and deciding not to hold. Claire didn't waste it. At best, we have a father who views custody as a key to a vault. At worst, a father ready to disappear a child into a program with a troubling record while laundering care through a financial instrument that was never meant to reward neglect. We are demonizing resources in a country where resources matter. Mitchell tried to thread a needle that had no eye. No, Claire replied, quiet rage lending weight without volume. We are refusing to let money impersonate love. Whitaker set down his pen. This court finds, on the record before it, that the Martin House petition for custody is not in the best interests of the child. Custody is denied. Primary physical and legal custody remains with Ms. Carter. Supervised visitation can be explored at a later date, contingent upon demonstrated good faith and a child-centered plan. A soft, collective breath moved through the room, the kind people don't realize they've been holding until it returns on its own. Angela's fingers flew to her mouth. Miles didn't move. He just blinked, slow, as if saving each frame. Further, Whitaker continued, voice steady as a level. The court orders an independent audit and judicial oversight of the Carter Trust. No disbursements without court approval. The court also refers matters relating to Hale Development Group and potential fraud or undue influence to the appropriate authorities. Mitchell tried to stand on jurisdiction, but even his shoes felt too loud. Draft orders today, Whitaker told the clerk. Serve parties. We are adjourned. The gavel fell and didn't echo. It absorbed. Outside, microphones sprouted like spring after rain. Tara moved in close enough to catch their faces, but far enough to give them a perimeter. How do you feel? What's next? A message to other families? Angela kept one arm around Miles like a boarder. We're going home, she said. That's the message. The clip hit feeds before lunch. A nurse in scrubs, a boy without a tie, a judge reminding a city that custody isn't a coupon. Hashtags learned the path by heart. Hashtag little black lawyer. Hash every child has a voice. Hash unseen. Black stories. Hash systemic racism. Hash listen to kids. Comment threads became tiny town halls. Some kind, some cruel. Many bewildered at how familiar the story felt across zip codes. At Mr. Lewis's barbershop, they turned the volume up and the clippers down. Look at that boy stand, someone said. Look at that mama not fall, another added. The system blinked, Mr. Lewis smiled. That's worth a cut on the house. He gave away 3 haircuts and a lecture about saving receipts. In the library, Ms. Alvarez printed the order and slid it into a clear sleeve like it might bruise. She let herself feel proud for exactly 5 seconds, then helped a woman learn her landlord couldn't enter without notice, and a teenager find a book that wouldn't talk down to him. Malik gave a nod to anyone who made eye contact. The unspoken code for you are seen. News traveled in official ways, too. A U.S. Attorney's Office emailed a state investigator who forwarded a memo to a council member who called a hearing that might only produce speeches or documents. At the bank, a meeting appeared. Risk. We need to talk about the Carter corridor. Kay, whoever they were, emptied their outbox and slept without a knot in their chest for the first time in months. For Preston, the aftermath arrived like weather he couldn't predict. A reporter on his doorstep, a partner asking for distance, a board member requesting his resignation, pending clarity. The phone rang less. Doors that had loved to open learned to be busy. Then the subpoena arrived, and even denial stood up and put its coat on. Miles learned that victory is not quiet. It hums. It knocks. It adds new chores to a life that already had enough. Interviews, chosen carefully by Angela. A morning show that listened, a local radio piece that spelled her name right, Tara's follow-up that was about the city-making room. Miles answered like a boy who did his homework. Direct, sometimes funny, never cruel. Monday, he took a math quiz like a regular kid whose weekend had been unusually televised. At lunch, a boy slid an orange across the table. For your mom, he said, which didn't make sense and made perfect sense. A girl asked if he was famous. Only on certain corners of the internet, he said, and she snorted. Mr. Daniels taped a clipping by the door. Proud of you. Please still turn in your essay. The calls Angela returned first were from patients' families and church folks, neighbors who brought casseroles they couldn't afford and did anyway. She chose one national interview, no gotcha, no panel auctioning her love. What did you tell your son the night before the hearing? The host asked. Angela looked into the camera and saw every kitchen table she'd ever cried at. I told him to be stubborn and kind, she said. The world tries to make you choose. A nonprofit lawyer offered to review the trust and translate legalese into kitchen speak. A philanthropist offered to fund legal literacy corners in 10 libraries. Ms. Alvarez already had a plan. Every child desk, plain language guides, a computer with the right bookmarks, volunteers trained to say, "What do you want to happen?" before, "Here's what to do." Tara's episode turned strangers into a loose confederation of helpers. A retired judge wrote, "I wish I'd leaned forward sooner." A third-grade teacher asked for picture books that don't lie about fairness. A kid from Camden mailed a drawing. A boy and a woman in front of a giant book labeled Truth. Title, Team. Angela taped it to the fridge with diploma-level reverence. Not everything softened. Anonymous messages arrived, thin insults pretending to be opinions. Angela deleted what she could and ignored what she couldn't. She did not read the comments past midnight. The Hale development investigation moved like bureaucracy in orthopedic shoes. Slow, steady, impossible to trip once it found cadence. Emails produced. Calendars combed. Pattern and practice surfaced, first as rumor, then as agenda item. Preston tried on faces, contrite, outraged, reasonable, persecuted. None fit long enough to be believed. The crisis manager said, "Apologize for treating your child like an asset," and Preston said he'd consider it, by which he meant no. When the indictment came, wire fraud, conspiracy, a sprinkling of crimes only very creative people commit, it didn't care what he'd considered. "Do I have to watch the arraignment?" Miles asked. "No," Angela said. "Justice isn't a show." He did homework. It felt better than cheering a stranger's downfall and more honest than pretending the world had learned its lesson. The next custody status conference drew no cameras. Orders had grown flesh, supervised visits, neutral setting, humility required. First time Preston didn't show. Second, he arrived late and left early. Third, he stayed, hands folded, eyes uneasy. "How's school?" he asked. "School's school," Miles said. They played Connect 4. Miles won. He didn't celebrate. "He didn't try to sell me anything," Miles told Angela. "So that's new." They made tacos and ate on the couch because rules can bend for small victories. By spring, the mural rose on Broad Street, a boy with a notebook and a city behind him. Not the skyline, but row houses, buses, a barber's pole, a stack of library books. Every child has a voice arched over it like a banner in a language everyone could read. Angela's hands were there in paint, steady, open, palms that had held little lungs and big days. The Every Child initiative launched in 4 libraries and then 10. Kids found the desks and the desks found kids. A quiet boy learned to ask a clerk for forms without looking at his shoes. A girl wrote down her siblings' names. Sometimes advocacy begins with a list. Volunteers learned to ask, "What do you want to happen?" Letters arrived, a grandmother in Tulsa, a foster kid in Baltimore, a dad in Detroit who was trying and tired of hearing he wasn't. Stories untied themselves and asked to be carried. Miles answered with methods, not miracles. "Time 300 millims." Angela wrote back late at night, "You're not bothering me. You're reminding me we're not alone. The reckoning was a season, not a day. The landlord postponed inspections, then fixed the boiler. The school asked Miles to speak. He said yes only if Mr. Daniels could talk about systems, not just stories. They did it together. Ask to be in the room, Miles said. And ask why the room looks the way it does, Mr. Daniels added. At church, the pastor preached less about Goliath and more about community audits. We don't need giants to slay when we have giants to surveil, he grinned. People laughed, then signed up for school board meetings they'd always meant to visit. Some nights were quiet, homework, shift work, a video chat with Devin about gamifying public records and building an app called Plain Language Please. Some nights were not. A fire alarm, a cousin's hearing, a stomach flu with no manners. Life refused to be a campaign. That was its kindness. Preston's trial date settled on a calendar that did not consult him. He pled not guilty. The machine turned toward consequences. He asked for more visits. Some happened. None repaired the part he'd broken with. She's out. The law can order presence. It cannot legislate tenderness, but it can make space for it not to be shoved aside. On a bright day that smelled like cut grass and new pencils, a city councilwoman proposed child voice protocol, structured opportunities for children, when appropriate and supported, to express their wishes clearly and safely in family court. Not perfect. Policies live where perfection takes a breath, but better than before, which was nothing. Angela stood at the back and squeezed Miles's shoulder. He squeezed back. Their squeeze had become a language. A certified letter confirmed the court's orders. Oversight, protection, respect for both paths Eleanor Hale had imagined. At the bottom, a note from the administrator. I met Eleanor. She would have liked you. She liked children who asked for proof. Angela read it twice and pinned it to the fridge under the Camden drawing where the tape had learned to hold weight. Reckonings ripple. On a late bus, a young mother with a sleeping baby said, "You're the nurse from TV." "I'm Miles's mom," Angela answered. The woman smiled. Same thing. That night, with the city humming its bus and laughter lullaby, Miles opened his notebook to a clean page. He wrote, "We didn't win a miracle. We won instructions." Underneath, 3 lines. Tell the truth before it buys a suit. Learn the room's rules. Then teach the room new ones. Leave the door open for the person who hurt you. Not wide, just not locked. He capped the pen and looked up. Angela was watching, counting breaths again, not from fear, but to remember the sound of now. "Spaghetti?" he asked. "Always," she said. "Some good things don't need a court order." The pot boiled. The night exhaled. Across town, fresh paint dried under a floodlight, sealing color into brick. On a bus, a boy traced the mural with his finger as the driver slowed just enough to let him finish the line. Somewhere, a printer didn't jam. Somewhere else, a judge leaned forward. And in 1,000 small rooms, kids who had been told to be quiet tried out the sound of their own voices, one sentence at a time, discovering that steady beats loud and together beats steady every single time. Summer didn't announce itself. It slipped into the city like a song everyone already knew the words to. The mural on Broad Street faded a shade softer under the sun, and someone, no one admitted who, kept chalking "Listen" on the sidewalk in front of it, lettered big enough for buses to read. At Jefferson Medical Center, Angela's badge now said "Charge Nurse," the kind of promotion that doesn't make your feet hurt less, but does make your voice travel farther down a hallway. On Saturdays, she still clipped coupons and watched the sales because money with a conscience knows it has other places to be. Miles was 12 now, taller in the way boys get when the world has given them new reasons to stand up. He'd traded the spiral notebook for a binder with tabs, but he still adjusted his glasses when he was about to say something that mattered, a habit he could never shake and didn't want to. The Every Child initiative had started as a corner shelf and became a small constellation. 1,000 libraries with legal literacy desks, a website in plain English, volunteers trained by the gospel of don't speak over kids. Ms. Alvarez called it a quiet revolution with good lighting. On a morning that smelled like rain pretending to sleep in, Miles and Angela sat on a couch not unlike the one where they'd eaten spaghetti the night of the order. Now the couch had a new slipcover, because hope deserves clean fabric. A morning show host smiled from the TV with the polished warmth of someone who meant it and also knew how to hit their marks. Today, she said, we're joined by Miles Carter, the Philadelphia kid whose courtroom courage inspired the Every Child initiative, now in all 50 states. The camera panned to Miles in the studio chair, sneakers swinging, because chairs never learned how tall Hart could be. What do you want people to know about your story? The host asked. He looked into the lens like it was a person and not a machine. That it's not just my story, he said. It's a lot of people's story who didn't get a camera, and that kids know what best feels like, even if we don't always know the big words for it. He paused. Also, my mom makes perfect spaghetti. The host laughed, and in living rooms across the country, people laughed with her, the laugh that makes room for something heavier to sit down. Backstage, Angela watched from a folding chair, hands clasped like prayer and habit. A producer whispered, "He's amazing." "He's a kid," Angela said, because she needed to say it out loud so the world would keep treating him like one. Letters still arrived, some on paper with stamps, some as emails with subject lines like "thank you" and "we tried what you said," and "do you think the judge will listen to me?" One came from Sophia Martinez in Los Angeles, purple ink and careful loops. "I used the library corner to help my grandma fight an eviction. We won. Thank you for telling kids like me that we count." Miles read it 3 times, then placed it in a shoebox with the others, a cardboard heart that beat whenever he lifted the lid. The policy Angela had stood in the back of a room to watch, child voice protocol, didn't fix everything. Policies never do. But in courtrooms from Sacramento to Savannah, judges started asking new questions. Do you want to tell me how you feel? Would you like to write it down? Do you want a support person with you? Some kids said yes and said it all. Some said no, and watched eyes change anyway. It wasn't magic, it was process. And process, when it learns how to care, can look a lot like love wearing a tie. Preston's Reckoning moved forward on its own timeline, indifferent to theatrics. No headline when his bail was revoked. No 2-minute segment when the plea deal came. He served his time. Halfway through, he started going to a group that met on Tuesdays. Burnt coffee, wobbling chairs. Men said things out loud they'd only ever thought in the quiet parts of their heads. A counselor told them, you can't undo the harm. You can only stop contributing to it. Preston didn't raise his hand at first. He listened. Then one day he said, I treated people like math. And a guy in a denim jacket said, me too. And the room breathed the way rooms do when lying gets boring. When his time ended, he found a small apartment without a view and a job at a store that sold TVs bigger than the walls they'd hang on. Sometimes in the aisles, a segment about Miles flickered across the screens, and Preston straightened remotes like a man aligning picture frames in a house he didn't own anymore. He showed up for supervised visits, late less often. He asked better questions. What are you reading? How's Mr. Daniels? He didn't ask for forgiveness. Finally learning forgiveness isn't a request form. It's a decision another person makes when they're ready, if they ever are. One Sunday at the playground, after a visit that didn't feel like apology or performance, just an hour with Connect 4 and small talk that didn't hurt, Preston stood at the chain link fence, hands in pockets. I know I can't fix what I did, he said. The wind carried cut grass and grilled onions from a family claiming a picnic table like a victory. But I can stop breaking things. Angela studied his face like it was a test she didn't need to pass. "That's a start," she said. "A start isn't a finish, but it's a direction." School rolled like it always does. Science projects better in the head than on the trifold. A band concert where flutes disappeared under drums. PE units invented by people who loved cones. On a Tuesday, Miles's English class read James Baldwin and argued whether love meant romance or responsibility. "Both," Miles said. "Sometimes." Mr. Daniels tapped the desk twice. In his classroom, that meant yes. In October, the initiative hosted its first Kid Advocates Summit. Library auditorium, awkward seats, excellent acoustics. They kept it small on purpose. Kids who'd used the desks, librarians who listened more than they spoke, social workers who knew when a form was a gate and when it was a bridge. No panel of experts, just pizza. Miles opened with 4 sentences. "We're not here to make anyone a mascot. We're here to trade instructions. And maybe, if we're lucky, to make it easier for the next kid to speak without needing a camera." A boy from Wilmington wrote a letter to a judge because talking made his throat feel like sandpaper. A girl from Camden preferred to bring receipts because adults respect paper like currency. A librarian from Chester taught volunteers to ask, "Do you want me to write that down for you?" when kids tripped over words. Morales came without a clipboard, their version of a day off. In the back, Ms. Alvarez cried twice and hit it 0 times. Tara recorded the day but never published the audio. Some things are better as a memory threaded between a few people who needed it. She did release an episode about the phrase systemic racism. Not a lecture, a map, where to look for it, bank memos, zoning laws, school policies, hospital intake forms, and how to name it without turning every conversation into a fight you can't win. She opened with Angela's line, "Sometimes racism isn't a slur, it's a shrug." The episode found ears that pretended they didn't need it, until they started nodding in their cars. One bright afternoon, the mail brought crimson letterhead that made Angela laugh before she opened it. A university with a yard people photograph invited Miles to a summer program, Law and Social Impact for Exceptional Students. A scholarship, squeaky dorm beds, a promise to learn with peers who want to fix things without breaking people. "Can I come home on weekends?" Miles asked. "Video call me and tour the cafeteria," Angela said. "Deal," he grinned, trying to look unimpressed, which lasted 4 minutes. Before he left, they visited the Parasolis mural at dusk. Light turned bricks to honey, and the painted notebook to a small sun. Under it, the chalk had been redrawn. "Listen." And beneath, someone added, "Then act." "You ready?" Angela asked. "I'm ready to be ready," he said. "That's the honest version," she replied. "The world can work with honest." The program was everything brochures promise and almost never deliver. Messy, loud-caring kids, adults who remembered being young enough to care loudly. Cases to read, arguments to try, justice to question. A civil rights attorney said, "Black Lives Matter isn't a trend, it's a sentence. Period at the end, not a question mark." Miles underlined period twice. He made friends. He missed home. He learned laundry that didn't shrink his favorite shirt. In August, he returned taller again, a fact Angela pretended not to notice because pointing it out made her eyes sting. They celebrated with spaghetti. Tradition is a kind of prayer you can eat. In the fall, a citywide assembly invited him to speak. He almost said no. He said yes because Mr. Daniels promised no inspirational music. The gym smelled like floor cleaner and popcorn, the smell gyms have always had. He didn't give a speech, he gave instructions. First, remember you're not alone. The story you think is just yours probably belongs to someone in this room too. Second, learn names of laws, of forms, of people who can help. Systems hide behind big words. Drag the words into the light. Third, Tell the truth before it buys a suit. Don't wait for cameras. Say it early. Say it steady. Fourth, Black Lives Matter isn't just about surviving traffic stops, it's belonging in rooms with microphones, clipboards, and seals on the wall. Fifth, when someone says systemic racism like it's a cloud nobody can touch, ask them to point to the policy. If they can't, donate their opinion to Lost and Found. Jim laughed, then got quiet, the way good rooms do. He ended without a finale. Don't let anyone convince you asking for fairness makes you ungrateful. Gratitude and demands can share a table. We've been doing that at my house for years. Meanwhile, the initiative rolled on. Zines, custody words in plain English, how to ask the clerk a hard question without throwing up. A 1-week unit for 8th graders, taught by librarians and social workers in sneakers. Some parents complained, some cheered. The unit stayed. Teachers added to the syllabus. We will learn how to be heard. On a gray Tuesday, a package arrived. Careful handwriting, no return address. Inside, a small leather-bound journal and a note. This belonged to Eleanor Hale. We thought you should have it. The entries were short, unsentimental, garden tomatoes, birthdays, and one line. My son is brilliant and lost. I hope his child will be brilliant and found. Angela touched the paper like it might bruise. Miles read the line again and felt a forgiveness pass through. Not absolution for Preston, but an old woman's hope landing where it needed to. The last visit to the mural before winter. New chalk names under the paint. Judges who listen. Librarians who don't hush courage. Moms who work nights, and just kids. Big letters, no adjectives. Rain would take the chalk. Someone would write it again. Progress in erasable strokes. Redrawn as needed. On the bus home, a little girl stared at Miles like he was a story she wasn't finished with. He wiggled his fingers. She smiled. Kids know when someone is safe. You know I'm proud, right? Angela asked, watching the city glide by like a movie she knew by heart. He rolled his eyes the way sons do when mothers say obvious things. Yeah. No, like deep proud. Not the TV kind. The kitchen kind. He nodded. I know. Upstairs, Angela made tea because it was cold. Miles opened his binder because it was Tuesday. He wrote on a clean page. Not for court, not for school, just to put a line in the world where it couldn't be lost. When they tell you to be quiet, don't yell. Speak steady. If they still don't hear you, bring a librarian. In another apartment across town, Preston turned off a TV that had started to feel like a mirror he wasn't ready to look into. He rubbed his palms together the way men do when they wish their hands had built more and broken less. He pulled a cheap notebook from a drawer and wrote the sentence he should have written years ago. What does he need? He stared, then added, a father who doesn't make the story about himself. He closed the notebook and set an alarm for morning. The city breathed. The mural kept watch. Library lights clicked off one by one, and then, somewhere, a kitchen in North Philly, a classroom where a teacher stayed too late, a courtroom where a judge leaned forward at last. Another light clicked on. If you asked Angela the moral, she'd say there isn't one, just work. Ms. Alvarez would say, information is a lantern. Hold it low so others can see the ground. Morales, care is a policy choice. Mr. Lewis, remember to tip. Tara, record the truth, then let it breathe. Ask Miles and he'd give you 5 steps in neat print. And end with a sentence that sounds simple because the truth always does. Black Lives Matter isn't just a chant, it's the way we set the table. Racism in America isn't a monster under the bed. It's a house rule we were told we couldn't change. We can change it, one policy at a time, one kid at a time, one judge leaning forward. And if you ask the city, it would hum the answer back. Steady, not loud. Steady wins. In the end, it wasn't a courtroom that changed. It was all of us who watched a child remind the world what justice should sound like. A voice that small shouldn't have had to carry so much truth. But it did. And it reached farther than anyone expected. If this story moved you, take a moment, share it, talk about it, keep the conversation alive. Because every time we listen, every time we speak up, we make the world a little more fair for the next child who refuses to be silenced. Thank you for being here. Your attention is the first step toward change.